Have you ever noticed how your mind refuses to let simple decisions stay simple? You replay conversations, you imagine every possible outcome, you rehearse what could go wrong again and again. And the strange part is, you know you're doing it. You tell yourself, why can't I just stop overthinking? But here's the uncomfortable question most people never ask. What if your mind isn't malfunctioning at all? What if it's doing exactly what it learned to do to keep you safe? Because when you understand why your brain does this, something surprising starts to happen. The noise in your head begins to make sense. But first, you have to look at what overthinking actually is. And more importantly, what it's protecting you from. Overthinking rarely looks traumatic from the outside. Most of the time, it happens quietly. You're lying in bed replaying a conversation from earlier. You're drafting a message, deleting it, rewriting it, deleting it again. You're standing in the grocery store aisle, somehow turning a small decision into a 5-minute debate inside your head. And the strange thing is, the thoughts feel important. Your brain tells you, think harder, consider every angle, don't miss anything. But the more you think, the more tangled everything becomes. Psychologists call this rumination, a cognitive loop where the brain repeatedly analyzes situations without reaching resolution. And research in cognitive science shows something interesting. Rumination isn't random. It tends to appear in people who learned early in life that mistakes had consequences. Not just practical consequences, but emotional consequences. Disapproval, embarrassment, criticism, rejection. When those experiences repeat enough times, the brain begins forming a quiet rule. Think longer, predict more, avoid mistakes. Over time, thinking stops being a tool. It becomes a defense system. And this is where things start to get complicated. Because the same mental process that once protected you now feels like the thing trapping you. But to understand why that happens, we need to look at something deeper. Something happening inside the brain itself. Most people treat overthinking like a personal weakness. They call themselves indecisive, anxious, too sensitive. But from a psychological perspective, overthinking is rarely a flaw. It's an adaptation. Your brain learned that careful thinking could reduce risk, so it built a stronger forecasting system. In evolutionary psychology, this ability is called threat simulation. Humans survived by imagining danger before it happened. The mind rehearsed scenarios. What if that animal attacks? What if the tribe rejects me? What if I make the wrong move? Those simulations increased survival. Your brain still uses the same mechanism today, except now the threats aren't predators. They're social situations, career decisions, messages that might be misunderstood. And suddenly, the mind that once protected you starts running simulations all day long. But here's the important part. Your brain isn't trying to make your life harder. It's trying to prevent pain. And the way it does that is surprisingly mechanical. Inside your brain, two systems constantly interact, the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. The amygdala is your brain's alarm system. It scans for threats, especially social threats like rejection or embarrassment. The prefrontal cortex is the planner. It analyzes situations, predicts outcomes, and decides what action to take. When the amygdala senses uncertainty, it sends a signal. Something could go wrong. The prefrontal cortex responds by analyzing the situation. That's normal thinking. But when the brain has learned that mistakes are costly, the alarm system becomes extra sensitive. So the amygdala keeps sending signals again and again and again. Each signal triggers another round of analysis. This creates a loop psychologists call the cognitive protection loop. Here's a simple mental model. Imagine your brain as a security guard watching surveillance cameras. If the guard thinks the area is dangerous, they keep rewinding the footage, checking angles, looking for threats, replaying the same scene over and over. Not because they're confused, because they're trying to prevent something bad from happening. Overthinking is the mental version of that security guard. Your brain keeps replaying scenarios, hoping to catch the mistake before it happens. The problem is that modern life contains endless uncertainty, and the brain hates uncertainty, so the guard never stops watching. But this raises an important question. If the brain is trying to protect you, how do you quiet the system without fighting it? That's where a different approach becomes useful. Not forcing the brain to stop thinking, but teaching it when thinking is no longer necessary. 1. Name the loop. The first step is simple awareness. When overthinking starts, label it. Not emotionally, just descriptively. This is the protection loop. Psychology research on metacognition shows that labeling a mental process activates the prefrontal cortex in a regulating way. It separates you from the thought. Instead of being inside the spiral, you're observing it. Example, you send a message and start imagining how it might be interpreted. Instead of diving deeper, you pause and think, this is my brain predicting social risk. That small shift reduces emotional intensity because the brain recognizes the pattern. 2. Reduce false threats. The brain's alarm system reacts strongly to uncertainty, so when situations stay ambiguous, the amygdala keeps firing. One way to reduce this is by increasing clarity. Example, instead of assuming someone is upset with you, ask a simple question. Instead of wondering if your work was good enough, request direct feedback. Behavioral psychology calls this uncertainty reduction. When the brain receives clear information, the threat signal weakens, and the thinking loop slows down. So here's the idea to remember. Your mind is not broken. It's overprotective, like a security system that learned the world was dangerous. And once you see that, the relationship with your thoughts changes. You don't fight the guard, you retrain it. You label the loop. You reduce uncertainty. You give thinking a boundary. You act before perfection. Over time, the guard stops replaying the same footage, not because it disappeared, but because it finally believes the environment is safe enough. Overthinking often feels like a personal failure, like your mind is working against you. But in reality, it's the result of a brain that learned to care deeply about consequences, a brain that wanted to avoid pain, and sometimes tried a little too hard. The goal isn't to silence that part of you. It's to teach it something new. That not every uncertain moment is a threat. That not every decision needs perfect prediction. And that sometimes life moves forward not because we solved every possibility, but because we allowed ourselves to take one imperfect step. And when the mind starts replaying things again, as it inevitably will, you might remember this. The voice in your head isn't your enemy. It's just a guard that stayed on duty too long. And little by little, you're teaching it when it can finally rest.